Well, hello out there to everybody out there across God's country. How's everybody doing this weekend? Hopefully doing well. We're back here again. They just can't stop us. This is Rick Wagner right here on KNZZ, KGLN. They have four places at least, 1192.7, 980 and 101.3. Of course, the internet, where we have a number of people listening to us. I appreciate that. And podcasts that you can reach through, a lot of podcast locations. I think we're on iTunes and probably TuneIn, I think. But you can go to our website at therickWagnerShow.com. You're a political Viking, of course. And go right to the podcast if you want to get the last week's show, or if you missed part of this show later on, you can go down and take a look, and you can have someone else listen to it. Think of what joy that might bring to them. It'll certainly bring it to me if you haven't listened to it. So, I like people to hear what I have to say. Mainly because it's sort of therapeutic, if for no other reason. And I'm kind of excited about this week, actually, folks. This is the first week where I really feel that I'm on the road to serfdom. Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, we've been working at it for a while, but I kind of feel like I'm becoming a serf, just like the rest of you out there. If you live in Colorado, if you live in Colorado, you know what I'm going to reference. If you don't, I'll tell you, here in Colorado, our legislature, which is made up predominantly of people who've escaped from hamster cages, decided that we needed, for reasons that they are mainly very unclear of, because you need to have an IQ that starts with a number larger than 2 digits and a 7. So anyway, if your IQ is not 3 digits and the first number is a 7 or below, you automatically qualify for the lottery we call elections to run as a Democrat member of our state legislature. So congratulations. None of those people are listening to this show, but if you know some, and they're probably out of work, then applying for local government or the state legislature is always an option for them. After all, wouldn't it be better if you just paid them rather than have them sit around and, apply for jobs they're not going to take and collect unemployment? Anyway, so what they've done is they have mandated no more plastic bags. That's right. No more plastic bags or plastic containers to keep food warm, because that's a modern thing. And we now live in medieval times. That's right. It's not so apparent right away, but that's kind of where it's headed. And I refused the other day when it was offered if I had my own sack. It sounds funny to say, doesn't it? They said, do you have your own sack? And I said, no, I do not. And I said, and the reason is because I'm not a peasant. I'm not trudging down the road in my homemade shoes with my burlap sack over my shoulder with all of my food in it as I stumble back to my hovel. And as I'm walking along the road, and this is a little theatric, but, as I'm like perhaps a car speeds by, a large black limousine, and it splashes water on me, and I don't get out of the way fast enough, and the brakes are slammed on, and the man opens the rolls down the rear window, power, of course, and orders his driver to get out. He is, of course, a lord in this medieval world. That is to say, he announces himself as saying something, don't you know that I'm the assistant to the undersecretary to the assistant in the Department of Commerce in charge of suppression of news? How dare you block my path? And would have the driver give me a sound thrashing, and after which I would tug my forelock and they would go on about their business. That's sort of the medieval world, I think, medieval-like world that we're sort of heading to. And I just see this whole bossing you around to the point where they tell you what you transport your belongings, because they're now your belongings, you purchase them at a store, home. They now tell you what you can carry them in. This reminds me a little bit of some of the medieval rules of dressing, accoutrement, that were in place. In medieval England, and some other places in Europe, for periods of time, they had rules about what clothes you could wear. Now, those clothes are, of course, as you would guess, based upon the social order. Of course, they would start with royalty, and they were able to wear certain things, ermine, purple robes, ermine trim, things like that. And then as you sort of tumble down the level of lordlings, fox fur, things like that were allowed, until you came down to the regular people who were allowed to wear none of that stuff, just to make sure that you knew where you stood in society. Seems to me that's kind of where we're going here. You no longer can choose how you transport your food, your belongings. You can no longer have any choice in how your food is delivered to you. It can no longer come in polystyrene or things like that because it kills, maybe messes up. We don't even know. And trust me, the legislatures that passed this do not know either what the point of it is. It just seems like, well, it's environmentally sound. We should virtue signal, and because we can. And it makes us feel powerful and important. And many of the people in government, were not for their position in government, would never be important or powerful or people that you would ever listen to for any reason whatsoever. They simply found a niche that has power with it. They've had nothing to do with the gathering of that power. They just worm their way into a position and utilize the power of the state. Why is that? Because we've let them. We have foolishly let ourselves take their eye off of what's going on around us, to no longer know what's going on in our governmental affairs. I can't tell you how many people I heard, and I know I've said this before. It's a little bit of an endless loop, I know, but once again, people were saying, when did this happen? This is referring, of course, to the denial of the plastic bag, the evil plastic bag, whose name shall not be spoken. What did this happen? Well, it happened a year ago. And it was, in the legislature, it was a bill. It was debated and voted upon, and of course signed by our libertarian, I have huge air quotes around that, our libertarian governor, good old jumpin' Jerry Polis, the Charlie Brown of governors, the round-headed kid that never gets anything right, that fell backward into some lucky guesses in internet, made a lot of money, and then bought the governorship. So then he signed it, and then he's continued to pretend to people periodically like, well, I could have some libertarian tendencies. Let me tell you something. Not you guys. I'm not talking to you guys. I do that kind of an abrasive way to address you. But let me tell him something. A libertarian, in any sense of the word, does not impose these kinds of limitations upon people. So that action, this single action, eliminates any pretense of libertarian. There are plenty others before this, but this one, come on. Just come on. I don't know what else to say. So that's what's happened. For those of you in other states listening and listening on the internet, or if you're, in some country that they don't and you happen to be picking up the radio signal at the AM side, gets out a long distance sometimes. This is the way our country is headed. Some of you live in countries that are already like that. For instance, you could live in Cuba. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but we have a whole new influx of immigrants from Cuba that have decided to take ship and go to Florida. It's not a easy run there. The distance isn't all that huge on the map, but it's a long way across open ocean. And they have gotten there. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but, Governor DeSantis says these are illegal immigrants and be treated and such. But the federal government is just not interested in these people. Just, send them back. Maybe they should. Don't talk to us about them. Maybe you should send them back. And of course, the reason is, we've said this before on the show, and you know this, the Cuban population living under Castro and seeing what socialism does are not easily converted to Democrats. They don't like them if you're a Democrat. They have not been their friend. So when they show up, not that big a show about it like they get with people that they think they can still indoctrinate into becoming Democrat voters. Although a lot of them, even from Venezuela, are smarter than they think. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us over the break there. Welcome back to Surf Radio. That's right. And surf spelled with an E, not a U. If this is the first time, you know what we're talking about. Oh, by the way, before I forget, often when I play that particular bumper, which those of you listening to the podcast don't hear because we can't put it on the podcast, it's only on the radio, That's Promised Land is what that's called. People will ask. Promised Land, Promised Land, I think I should say that correctly, by, of course, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. And it's not as easily found and played as often as you would think. I personally love that song. I think it sounds great. It's always got your foot tapping, and it has a lot of words. Some songs have a few words repeated over and over again. Got a lot of words. Tells quite a story. But I like to mention that because people occasionally, if we play it, will write in and ask what the name of it is. And by the way, you can write in as well, and I like hearing from you guys. I'm not often able to respond, but I do read everything. And you can reach me at Rick Wagner, simple Rick Wagner, no dots or dashes, at mail.com. And I appreciate that as well. So I was looking around the office today. I thought I'd check the storeroom. I have a storeroom back there because I wanted to make sure that Joe Biden hadn't left any classified documents in it. Appears though every place that's a storeroom, he managed to strew about some, documents Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. Who knows, what's the problem? What's going on out there? This is, listen to me, buddy. Let's do push-ups. Like you can do a push-up. You guys have been following the story, I know, and you can look at it. And I try to put these up at their website at therickWagnerShow.com. And, first they found these documents in a closet. Some, not these, but some like 10 or 12 classified, some of them secret. I'm surprised we're able to talk about them. Documents in a closet, a locked closet in his, quote, office at Penn State. Penn State's interesting because he has claimed to have been a professor there. I was a professor there. No, he wasn't. He showed up 9 times for some events. Not a professor. Dr. Jill probably filled in for him. But he has the Biden Center there. And actually, I think it's at U of Penn. But the Biden Center for, I don't know, looking for new Bidens. It's hard to say what it is, but we do know that it is immensely popular with anonymous donors from China. Yes, millions of dollars flowed into the Biden Center there from China. Apparently, people have tried to find out from the university where this particularly came from and where it was spent. Joe apparently got $1 million for his teaching because you can imagine the kind of knowledge that dude could lay on you. Woof. There's really not a price you wouldn't be willing to pay for that. It's unclear why. All the university apparently has said is that, the money that he received didn't come from China. Well, that's an obvious canard, right? Because if they're stupid enough just to take the check from China and endorse the back of it over to Joe, that seems a little bit, even for them, even for the Bidens and their genius capacity for graft, I don't think they would tumble to that. This is a sad thing about the Bidens, by the way, is that they're so inept. Think how bad the system should be that the Bidens can make money off of it. Think about that. You wouldn't let these guys, they couldn't put a Tinker Toy set together. Yet they can make tens of millions of dollars off of something to do with these. Don't forget, they love the Ukraine. Yes, long before the war happened, they still love them some Ukraine. And the university is just very dodgy about it. Apparently his requests have just gone either unanswered or the only answer they've given is, well, any money donated from China to the university through the Biden Center did not go to Joe. Of course not. What if you wanted to keep that direct connection out, the money goes into one fund and you just write the check out of another one, don't you? I mean, how transparent is that? Like that's going to put people off. Like, oh yeah, the assumption there, I guess, is the officials at the university have been dealing with Bidens too long. And they think that the general public has that level of mental acuity, and they can just like, well, it didn't come from that check didn't come from China, and you would just toddle off like one of the Bidens and go, okay. But of course, that is not an answer. So we don't know that. People will be trying to find out. We'll see if they have any luck with that at all. But, first they found these documents there. Then they found somewhere else, just a few, strewn around. Not important. Don't you even look that way. It's not important. And then, this is the funniest one. If you guys have seen this, there was some more in his garage in Delaware, where he goes in and something is done. Remember, he goes back to Delaware all the time. My theory is he replaced by a clone that's grown in the basement, and they just come in and recharge him with some, I don't know, electricity. I sort of envision that sort of 1940s Frankenstein thing with a lot of Van de Graaff generators and electricity flashing around and, a test tube with him in it and kind of electricity going back and forth. But they have a couple of them, and, I think they just replace him. Now, this is just a theory, okay? It's just kind of wild, I know, but, doesn't seem any crazier than a lot of things he does. Anyway, but this is the same place that he goes all the time. And, of course, he keeps his wonderful 67 Corvette convertible, which, by the way, I'd like to have one. I love those cars, in there. And during that's funny. During a segment of Jay Leno's Garage, which I guess is on one of the many bazillion cable channels, because, Jay Leno was a great collector of cars. And he visits some other people that have cars he went to look at. And apparently they went to visit Biden. Probably Biden begged them to, but we don't know that. So Biden pulls this Corvette out of this garage where he keeps it stored at his laboratory / home in Delaware. And now they went back, and you could see the boxes in the garage that apparently they pulled these documents out of. And Biden's answer to Peter Doocy, I think it might have been Thursday, when they asked him about was that secure, was that it was in a locked garage. Like, the garage was locked. It's where I keep my Corvette. Okay then. Yes, no problem. I understand that a lot of sensitive documents of the CIA are kept in a parking garage down below, possibly, in a footlocker. So that's his answer. They don't even locked anything. There's apparently a box sitting there, like a cardboard box. And I saw the circled thing of it. You guys have to take a look at it. It's hilarious, and then it makes you cry a little bit as a patriot and a person who loves the country, because that's the group that's running it. And then the original flyby kind of stuff by the journalism with the first one was a hysterical response because, of course, this made everybody think about this Mar-a-Lago raid and all this stuff about President Trump and how bad he was. And then all these crazy things that Biden said. I can't imagine how those documents got out there. And can you imagine the damage that they may been done? Well, he has quite the imagination. So they realized they had to defend this. No big deal. Inadvertent. Who knows how they got in a locked closet in his, quote, office at the Biden Center. And that's doing, we're not 100% sure what kind of work. He's not there doing it, but China's funding something. Or people in China. We don't know. Perhaps they were there setting up an office so they could display Hunter's artwork. Just good as an explanation as any. So that was happening. But then the second bunch, and then this the Corvette files, as I will refer to them, started turning up. And finally, even people at the AP and CBS News started asking our Karine Jean-Pierre about it. Of course, she can't answer any questions. I'm not certain that she can properly answer where she's headed after the briefing without it being written in that book she carries with us, because that's her reference for everything. And she had no way to answer that, dodged the questions, on and on. It also had a touch of humor to it if you didn't care about your country. And, you laugh for a minute and you think, oh my gosh, that's my country that these people are in charge of. So that was hilarious, like I said, as a person, if you take yourself out of being a citizen of the United States. We really have to see how that goes. And Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, who should be removed from office immediately, but I doubt that's going to happen, finally, after so much pressure, has appointed a special counsel to look into it. Because the big thing was, of course, the armed raid on Mar-a-Lago and the whole, the whole 9 yards of the law enforcement might that was brought against Trump, none of that was even considered with Biden. As a matter of fact, it was like, he just forgot, like he was fumbling in his jacket and it all fell out and no one even noticed it. And if they did notice it, they didn't think they were important. And if somebody did find them, there was nothing to it. So after that, there's only so many times you can find this stuff strewn about the country, right? And so he appointed a special counsel. I haven't looked into it yet to see what sort of Democrat operative that is, but interesting stuff. Okay, everybody, thanks. Sticking around, I appreciate that. Back here right on KNZZ, KJLN. Oh, that's 4 stations across western Colorado, eastern Utah, the Internet. Once again, we appreciate all of the listeners we have on the Internet, and those of you that are listening on the podcast. And like I said before, you can always catch up on a show if you miss it by podcast, and you can go to our webpage if you want to get on that. It's therickWagnerShow.com. And some of you link to it on the politicalviking.com because that's our nom de plume on a couple other platforms on YouTube and Facebook. And you can find us at Political Viking on Facebook and join up, come take a look, and become a friend on Facebook. And you'll see some of the things we post there. And it's a great spot. I've been it's really happy with people who get on there. We're going to spend a little more time on it here in the future and kind of jazz it up a little bit. So feel free to do that. But I'm looking through my notes here, and my notes always make me laugh a little bit. I mean, it's laugh or cry. It's kind of one of those things. But and a couple of things that you folks have sent me over time as well. But there's just some craziness out there. And, we were talking earlier in the other segments about this constant finding of documents that Biden classified, very classified documents that have been found, of course, at University of Pennsylvania. And by the way, if I believe I've said Penn State at least once, and that's not, it's University of Pennsylvania, 2 different places, 2 different football teams for sure. And, University of Pennsylvania is, of course, technically one of the Ivy Leagues, although it's sort of a lower ranked Ivy League. It does have the Wharton School of Business, however, where Donald Trump went. A lot of people, it's a great business school. But the place is, of course, a hotbed of left-wing radicalism and wokeism, like all of them. So it's a perfect place for the Biden Center. Yes, the Penn Biden Center. You can imagine the sort of genius stuff that Biden would be able to contribute to these things. I mean, he's so erudite and perceptive. Once again, not his age. He's been a moron his entire life. He's just showing his angry side, and he's a little slower to express the moronic side, but it's just the same. And I had to, during the break here, I had looked again at him backing in out of his garage with this stack of documents in the garage, right? And of course, his version is, well, Hunter, he restored my '67 Corvette, yeah, like he had something to do with it. I mean, remember how this works? I mean, Joe gets the information, gives it to Hunter. Hunter apparently sells it, and then that's how so it's not the other way around. And besides that, when he said Hunter restored it, Hunter did not restore his car. Do you think Hunter Biden, in his off time, in other words, the, hour or 2 a week when they can manage to hose him off and put him in a suit and parade him around before he goes back to performing like he does in those wonderful videos they found on the laptop, you think he's got any mechanical ability to restore that car in the garage? You think he's doing that? You think you'd trust Hunter Biden with a screwdriver or a pocket knife? That's just a ridiculous assumption all by itself. So more will come out about this, perhaps. Everything that the Department of Justice does now is an effort in some way to minimize this, cover it up, or act like they're doing something when they're not. This prosecutor that they've appointed as a special counsel, because they were forced into it as these new revelations came up. He's a Trump appointee. Yeah, it's a low-level Trump appointee. He's not a buddy with Trump, okay? He was appointed during the Trump administration. So I guess the best you can hope for is he's not an absolute, complete radical like those that were appointed during the Obama administration. But beyond that, it doesn't tell you a darn thing. And having worked at the Department of Justice for any time like he has, of course, it's practically impossible at an upper level of prosecutor there to be, not have a screw loose and the screw loose in the direction of the left. I guess we could be surprised, but we're not. And also remember that as a sitting president, Joe Biden can't be charged with anything. Now, Donald Trump can because he's no longer president, but Joe Biden can't be charged with anything. So that's not going to happen. And here's something else that I know you know this, but the mainstream media just blows right past it. I actually made a point when I was looking at this stuff to talk about and to read, like, I think it was a New York magazine. Gives you some idea of the perspective on that. These are the hardcore Manhattanites that, every time they talk about something about Trump, they have to mention how much they loathe him. I mean, that's how they started out. And that's the good stuff when they're trying to say, well, Trump has to be given some, we loathe him, of course. So I read their description of this in there. And if you read it, you almost would be unable to understand what happened because the whole piece was an apology for Biden in the sense that it's, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's anybody could have done it, this and that. And then probably a third of it is these differentiations. They try and draw between how Joe Biden handled these documents and, of course, evil incarnate Donald Trump handled his documents. First of all, there are some big differences that they're just factual differences. One is Donald Trump took these documents apparently with him, thinking that he could, and they have been aware of their existence pretty much since he left the presidency. They weren't discovered by someone, dusting, like apparently happened with Joe. They were something that were disputed. The National Archives started disputing them. Well, we think we need, no, you don't. Yes, we do. And so that's completely left out, the way they were discovered. In fact, I would say Trump's weren't discovered. They were known, and there was a dispute about this. And there's been dispute with presidents before about what records they can keep. The presidents are authorized. It's very confusing, the Presidential Records Act. They're authorized to make copies of their personal documents and things like that to put in their library, like, this megalithic sort of Constantinople thing that Obama's trying to build in Chicago. I mean, he's not going to visit it or anything. He doesn't go back to Chicago anymore. Good Lord, why would he go back to Chicago? He lives in Martha's Vineyard and has another estate in Hawaii. Like I said before, the man could not be more isolated from the rest of us, right? 2 islands. How much more obvious can that be? He doesn't want to mix with you, okay? He's going to live on his island with a wall around it and venture out periodically to tell us how bad we are and then toddle himself back in and see if anybody's giving him any money for something. So the difference between what's happens here is that Joe, and this is the big thing that they just don't even mention. Joe was vice president. Joe was not authorized to remove anything. Joe was not authorized to declassify anything. Only the president was authorized to declassify anything. So there's an argument about whether Trump had declassified some of these things during his presidency. That argument isn't even available to Joe. Now, I guess you could make some weird argument. I'm trying to think about that now. Now that Joe is president, could he go back and unclassify or declassify the documents that he walked away from, after he was vice president 6 years ago? I don't know. They've made weirder arguments. I haven't heard that one yet, but they've pitched everything. So, yeah, this is a huge difference. Joe was never, during the time he possessed these documents after he left his job, which, by the way, I've noticed that when he left the White House, Joe Biden was vice president. Can I keep saying that? He didn't live in the White House. He lived in the vice president's residence. If he was living in the White House, it was as a troll, or perhaps some of those people you read in these movies that they live up in the crawl space without people knowing about it. If he wasn't doing that, he didn't live in the White House. I've seen that in a couple of left-wing publications. When Joe Biden left the White House, he didn't leave the White House unless he was in there stuffing silverware in his pockets and then ran out just before Obama left office. He didn't live in the White House. So they always like trying to make it like he was more important than he was. He was a placeholder. He was Kamala Harris. He was someone to keep Obama safe. If people wanted to remove Obama from office or something, there was Joe, and nobody wanted that. It's kind of the same thing that's happening with Kamala. You don't geez, just when you think you'd like to see Joe gone, well, if it meant that we automatically got Kamala, in other words, didn't have a chance to even vote on her, well, it's like, at least Joe we can probably, put up with. We know that she's perhaps even worse. So you get scared of the devil you know problem, right? So there's that. But I'm telling you, you read this stuff. Now, I read this article, and then I read one on MSN. Now, remember what MSNBC stands for. Remember back where it started? I've mentioned this before. Microsoft NBC. They joined up there to start the channel. Now, Microsoft has gotten out of it, but they kept the denomination. So I read on MSN News, which I can't tell if it's part of Microsoft or it's part of MSNBC, but it's very far left. It's you go to left field. Imagine you're playing baseball. You look out to left field, far left field. There's a guy there. Forget about him. Look at the fence. Look over the fence. There's a guy drunk, asleep in a lawn chair at the end of the parking lot. That's MSNBC in the left field. And so I was reading that, and once again, it was just nothing but all of these sort of phony differences between the classified documents. So it's interesting to see how they work, actually. And they're so upset because now the media is actually asking some harder questions, even CBS and the AP, and they keep, because Caroline Jean-Pierre is not very good at answering questions, which is not a great talent not to have if you're a press secretary. She does not possess it. We don't know her personally, but she seems to have just two problems. She doesn't have any information, and she doesn't know how to tell people that she doesn't have any information. She just keeps walking around it. I've been perfectly clear here. How many times I've said that? The president's perfectly clear. No, he hasn't. Just saying he doesn't know is not perfectly clear. It's pretty funny, actually. But, they're worried about news. They actually believe, the Biden White House, there's several leaks about this, actually believe that the news is hard on Joe, right? And that one of the problems is that the news out there is becoming less diverse. There's less of it. So just to make you feel pretty good about what they're thinking about out there. And you'll remember this from just during the Obama administration. They floated this thing, I think, if I remember right, that the federal government proposes greater role in local news. Really? Gee, they've had such experience having a greater role in Twitter. Is that what they mean? Of course that's what they mean. The Government Accounting Office says that they'd like to keep these like newspapers and small news sources and stuff out there in business. And they're proposing that maybe we should give tax incentives or credits, direct government funding. I'm reading from the story. Government advertising, federal grants or loans, and even government intervention with respect to dominant news platforms to bolster local and non-profit news. Now, in case you haven't heard this latest little song and dance, is this very, very strong push. It's just below the surface to try and get newspapers, especially, and a couple other places that are in the news that nobody wants to hear from, to become nonprofits, not-for-profits. Why is that? Well, there's some advantages to that. If you can get people to donate to you, right? But what they want is, because then it's nonprofits, the federal government is getting more and more involved in funneling money to nonprofits. And I'm going to say a name to you that hopefully will ring a bell. It's a number of years ago, but it was the first thing that really popped up. Remember Acorn? Yeah, Acorn was a housing community activist group located, as I remember, in Chicago or something like that. And it turned out they were getting government money to do all this outreach that, oddly enough, seemed like political work. Right? And that was in really, I think, the first Obama administration. And that was the first time it really popped out that there was something besides National Public Radio and that little group that they were funneling money to in some way that were, quote, nonprofits. Now there is a tremendous amount of NGOs. You'll see this in news articles all the time. I hate it when they pop these acronyms out, because if you haven't been following them, then what are they talking? You got to look it up. What do you do? Non-governmental operations, right? Essentially, all of these not-for-profits that have been set up, many of whom got set up. Remember all these things that got set up by Mark Zuckerberg before the 2020 election that were supposed to help with voting, but instead of going places where they really needed help, like rural areas and things that you could have actually done something with, they went to all of the counties in places like Wisconsin and, strangely enough, maybe Georgia and other places like that, and sort of invaded and took over in many ways the function of the clerks, to try and turn out the vote, as it were, And now Zuckerberg put, I think, $416 million into that, At that time, that was something that he probably, had in a sock drawer someplace and forgot it was there. Oh, look at this. And which is another problem, by the way. The problem being that the concentration of capital in the United States has become ridiculous amongst very small. I don't think we ever had groups of people with as much capital above what would be the median income. I mean, we have, if you go along the sort of the coastal corridor of California, I don't know, there's probably a couple $1 trillion in capital there. And the ability to distribute that capital out is held really a relatively few amount of people, which allows them to do all sorts of really significant things with almost no real cost to them. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of money. $10 million to some organization someplace sounds like a lot of money to us. Doesn't sound like that Zuckerberg, the Google guys, Lauren Mackenzie Bezos. I can't remember what her name is now. She's getting divorced for a second time. Was dumping money into it. I think she bought the Atlantic. These people can drop $1 million into some race someplace or some cause like you'd put money in a parking meter. That can be a real problem in terms of anybody's else's ability to compete with that. And that's been happening a lot. Now, the reason they're able to do that is because we've allowed this megalithic, so this large stone would be, I guess we could say that if you would translate that. But these mega corporations to continuously dominate portions of the information system in a way that we never would have even contemplated doing in the 70s and probably in the 80s. The antitrust acts, people would have been demanding that they split these guys up. They control far too much of the information flow through one and two companies. It's all okay. Calm down. We don't need to do that. You know how we can tell that it's okay? Because we're big contributors to politicians, and they represent you, and they're okay with it. That's their answer. That's not a good answer. But that's what's happening. But we've got to really watch this local news things, because they tried this before, and people were kind of, what the? And as soon as a light got shined on it, it's, like turning the light on in a kitchen. If there's a cockroach there, they scramble away. So they kind of went back into it. But they still want desperately to somehow take your tax dollars and funnel them to smaller news sources and essentially direct them. Like I said, you're seeing what happened with Twitter. Imagine that on smaller scale all over the place. And their problem is a lot of these small these like newspapers and stuff are going out of business because, well, the business model is tough right now. That's just fair. The other piece is a lot of them are, they are far left rags or propaganda machines who dislike half their readers. Hard to stay in business when people figure that out. So, what's the answer? Tax money. Make sure those guys keep pumping that stuff out, whether you subscribe to it or not, because you need to know, right? It's like those, what is that, NBC, with the little star that shoots across and it makes a little noise. Ring, it says, and you need to know, or if you need to know, or something like that. Very disturbing when I see it. Stop instructing me, okay? That's not what we watch TV for, is to be instructed about how to be better people, If there is, we'll go to the Better People channel and see if there's something on there that we like. But, watch this very carefully, because these characters desperately want to get tax money involved in the news. Because once they sew that up, I mean, they have the internet. They've been working on it. If we don't wake up and try and split that up a little bit, they have internet. They have the big companies. They have, essentially the control over what apps you have on your phone, all this stuff that people use far too much, I might add. But, we're stuck that way. We've bought into it. Our first mistake, of course, was thinking that all this stuff was free. Remember? No, Facebook, don't have to pay for it. Yeah. Yeah, well, so how do you think they make all that money? You're not paying for anything. You're using it all the time. That's the customers. Wait a second. They're selling essentially you. Not you as a physical person, just you as a entity that exists as part of your information about who you are, what you do, where you go, what you like, what you don't like, what you say. They sell that. And they track it. And it's just getting more sophisticated all the time. And that's where their money comes from. Because people who are advertisers and things buy that from them so they can hector you. And I wonder more and more how much of it is going back to the federal government. The cooperation between the federal government and these organizations was even more chilling when you read those Twitter files than I even thought. I mean, the FBI agents, those guys in San Francisco that were working in the FBI on this stuff in particular, were they apparently were working full time to censor Twitter. I mean, they got stuff all the time. It was also said that the folks at Twitter were having trouble keeping up with all their requests. And that didn't even include the Balloon Boy had Adam Schiff there with his request for, to get people to be quiet, misinformation. Also, speaking on that, there is, I believe, New Jersey. Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, has just signed something that's going to require all the kids in school to get a class on how to recognize misinformation. What do you think is going to be in that one? You think it's going to be how you sort out the truth, really sort out things, think for yourself and look at other information and go, think that's what it's going to be? Oh, no. It's going to be about, Russiagate and how Trump should be prosecuted, and if you hear anything else, that's misinformation. It's the fact that people let this being done to their kids is just beyond me. I don't get how people put up with it, but that's why we got to get these school boards, and this local politics is just way too important, folks. It's moved into the level where they're going to get them really young and get your money right at the basis, right at your city councils, right at your school boards, and you're not paying attention, and they're going to move in that. Anyway, one last thing is McCarthy is authorized to releasing the 14,000 hours of security footage from the Capitol riot, and it's got the left just beside themselves. Watch for that. Talk to you next week.